Hello and welcome to Europe's Climate and Environment, a video podcast by the European Environment Agency, where we go through the latest data and information on the climate and environment in Europe through the insights of our experts.
The role of the network, the data that we use to inform all of our work is collected from all over Europe. And there are thousands of people involved in that entire process. If you can imagine whether it's forestry or air pollution, monitoring, the amount of on-the-ground work that is needed by people in the countries to actually generate that is enormous.
My name is Conce Brand and welcome to the show. On today's show, we'll be talking with two experts, Katja Rosenbohm, head of our communications department, and Karl Hamilton, head of our digital department, to discuss people, networks, and data, and how it's used in Europe's Environment 2025 report. Katja and Karl, welcome to our episode today, episode 2 of our special series on Europe's Environment 2025. Perhaps we can start first, Katja, by introducing yourself.
Yeah, hello, I'm Katja Rosenbohm. I'm leading the communications department here at the European Environment Agency, and we are doing also the networking with all our member countries, the publishing of our knowledge work, and then all the outreach on all channels.
Thanks. And Karl.
Yeah, and I'm Karl Hamilton. I'm head of the digital department here at the agency and responsible for the technology, the central data services, and also Earth observation and Copernicus.
Okay, great. We have an interesting episode today, so perhaps we'll get right into it. Perhaps we can start with the network, Katja, the net that binds our agency to the member states, to the partner countries. Can you explain what it does and why?
Yeah, a net that binds us, that's quite a nice metaphor. I liked it. So what has happened as the agency was created many years ago, there was no harmonized information about the state of the environment across the continent. And that is more or less what we do. And what we still do today is to ensure that we have a harmonized state of the environment information that goes across the continent. Also, we do know a bit more than that. We do data reporting, but also knowledge sharing. And that is the main goal. And I can say our agency spends over actually more than the 27 countries that the EU is composed of. We have 38 countries, meaning we can give a picture across the continent.
Yeah, so it's quite unique in terms of global partnerships like that.
Yes, I think it's nowhere else in the world that we know of such a network exists.
Yeah, so this partnership, European Information and Observation Network, quite a mouthful, IONET, as the acronym is basically the backbone of the agency, is it not?
It definitely is, and it was also created already. It was embedded in our founding regulation that it's not only the entity here, it's the whole network that we are presenting basically here. And this network is also composed of many institutions. Mainly we work in the countries with the Environment Protection Agency. That's our main anchor point there. But then around that, we speak about experts that are organized in different thematic networks, from biodiversity to clean energy to circular economy. And they ensure that what we do, that the knowledge that we have is really cohesive and agreed across the continent.
Okay, so specifically what sort of tasks is done in this network?
Yeah. So there's this traditional task that Karl knows most of, which is reporting. And there are many EU legislative files and other information that we collect in a very streamlined way, digital today mostly, but also the knowledge that we collect, that this data and information on the different legislative files in the EU, so that we can monitor progress where we stand on Europe. But there's also an increasing element of knowledge sharing, and that goes the other way around. So while we want to be we are a very diverse continent, and many countries have really good examples of how they tackle the challenges in environment and climate and sustainability. So we also bring, via this network, we bring that to the EU level so that we can learn from each other there.
Okay, thanks. And in what way does this network contribute to Europe's Environment 2025 report?
So this edition is a very special one because we have a country profile element of the report, which is quite substantial. And you can imagine that every country has drafted their own little mini assessment of where they stand on environment and climate consideration, on socioeconomic change, and for the first time also on what we call sustainability systemic transition. And that's the first time we have such an element in our report where we actually look at how the different countries are doing, and therefore the EU in total, on our sustainability journey. So where we are today on that journey. And that's the first time that we did. So each country has done their own assessment around that. I would say it's about 14, 15 pages if we would print it, but we don't. And then there are about 10 indicators that are comparable. So across these topics of environment and climate, you have comparable indicators that we can show the progress in between the countries and where we are good at, where we still need to work on.
Okay, great. Karl, if I can turn to you on data. I think many people may not know how much data the agency works with, how this network works as far as data is concerned. What sort of data are we talking about specifically? And of course, also I want to also allude to what tools you use to get that data.
Yeah. So building a little bit on what Katja was saying and the role of the network, I mean, the data that we use to inform all of our work is collected from all over Europe. And there are thousands of people involved in that entire process. If you can imagine whether it's forestry or air pollution monitoring, the amount of on-the-ground work that is needed by people in the countries to actually generate that is enormous. And then, of course, that's then aggregated up to the country level and then reported to us. So you asked about the volumes of data we handle. We've got over 145 so-called data flows that underpin the work of the entire agency. And that covers everything from air quality, water quality, pollution, circular economy, energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, really diverse data that's mainly geospatial in nature. By geospatial, that of course refers to linking that to a physical place on the earth so we can actually see the pan-European picture. And as Katja also mentioned, that's really the unique value we bring. Of course, the countries do their work, but we can pull it together into this 38-country perspective. So you asked about where that data is collected from. I've alluded to that a little bit. It could be technical sensors on the ground. It can also be measurements that are actually conducted physically within the countries. And we also have a fairly unique data source in the form of Earth observation. So we have the Copernicus program in Europe, this part of the space program, and we're actually responsible for running part of that, the land monitoring service, and that enables us to actually see the Earth from above and actually use that to supplement the data sources we have. So if you can imagine in a forest, from a satellite you can see the top, but you can't necessarily see what's underneath, and that's where you need to bring these two different perspectives together.
Yeah, and perhaps, I don't know how this all started, but are people still counting butterflies, for instance? How do we assess a lot of these things like soil fragmentation? You talked a bit about satellite use.
Yeah.
Are they just solely used by satellite and high tech, or to what?
No, it's a combination. And of course, there are different techniques depending on the field being measured. So of course, if it's water quality, you'll be taking samples, and of course, then they're assessed in a lab. Biodiversity, it can also be field assessments, looking at a particular area and then extrapolating from that. And then certain characteristics, we can use satellite observations to actually supplement. Not everything can be seen at that level of resolution. If you imagine a satellite being able to see a butterfly, it's an incredibly high level of resolution.
So no James Bond here
quite yet. No James Bond quite yet, I would say, for the butterflies. But what we're seeing is that with Earth observation, there are new so-called missions being launched all the time, which is giving us, over the coming years, more parameters about soil quality, moisture, pollutants, algae blooms, water quality. So things that you maybe traditionally would have used on-the-ground measurements for, you're increasingly being able to monitor from the satellites. So this complementarity, I think, will exist and evolve further.
Okay. Katja, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just was inspired by the question on whether the butterflies are still the ones that we measure progress about. And I would argue that also it really nicely illustrates some of the challenges that we have indeed, because yes, it's the butterflies and it's the habitats that we traditionally measure the progress in nature protection, right? So, but we need to advance it. And as Karl said, there's satellites as an opportunities, there's nature protective areas and how we protect better. These are also ways of measuring. So it's a constant evolution of how we understand that we are making progress.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Karl, what do we do with this data here at the EEA? How do we handle it?
Yeah, good question. So we, of course, receive data flows according to legislative demand. So different types of data have different reporting frequencies. And some data we actually collect in near real time as well. The important thing is that when it's submitted by the countries, we then take that data in. And of course, they've done their quality checks on it before it's been submitted. We then do further quality checks and preparations to create a European data set. So this is where we take all the national data sets and actually create this pan-European picture. And we work very closely with experts within the EEA as well on actually assessing that data. And that's really used then to derive the types of insights that you'll see in the Europe's Environment 2025 report. So effectively taking this data and turning it into assessments and knowledge that can help to inform policy making, as Katja mentioned, inform on the progress towards targets, and really impact our decision making and thinking about environment and climate and sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and of course, there's a lot of attention in recent years how verified this data is, how truthful, factual this data is. How do we check the accuracy of the data?
Of course, we operate at this science policy interface, and we need to ensure that everything we do is based on factual information. And so the data is submitted to us from the countries where they've verified and sent it to us. Then, of course, we do quality checks on the data to make sure it's harmonized, that it's reliable. And we also make that data publicly available. So for the vast majority of all the data we handle, it's available to the public. So it's full transparency of what we take in and how it's actually used to inform assessments. It was a really good point that you mentioned, because in today's world, the authenticity and trustworthiness of data and information is often under question. And that's why I think transparency is incredibly important. And it also ties very much into the work that you're responsible for, Katja.
Yes, maybe if I add, I think this is a very important point. I think the fact that we do work with the member countries and many of our information is so-called authoritative, coming from the public administration. So they are already pre-checked nationally, but we will then do another quality check. And if we use other sources that are not coming from that world, so to speak, then we take this approach, as Karl says. We are really transparent on the sources, and you always can see what sources we used on the data, but also on other knowledge that we provide.
Mm-hmm. So for the Europe's Environment 2025 report, what sort of data did we use, and how much are we talking about? Can we quantify that at all? Is it, seeing it's the most comprehensive report done on Europe's environment and climate?
Yeah, I mean, you can quantify it in different ways. The Europe's Environment 2025 report draws on all of the data we hold as an organization. So I mentioned we had over 145 data flows, but they're also over a number of years. We also have the Copernicus data, where you've got petabytes of information and data that's actually used to inform the work that we do. And then, of course, each of those data sets has its own level of complexity. So if you think of air quality, for example, you've got thousands of sensors across all of the countries. So you're talking about many thousands of data points per hour, per day, per month. So it's like you can quantify in so many different ways. So an enormous amount of data, I would say, is probably the short answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. And Katja, looking ahead, there's a lot of technological change. Of course, this includes the use of artificial intelligence as well. To what extent, for both of you, I guess, is AI a factor going forward? Also, starting with this report, how are we using AI, artificial intelligence, already in this area?
Yeah, so one of the very visible ways for those who want to explore the report further, and we of course hope they do, and the fact you're watching this means you want to, we've actually released an AI assistant, Europe's Environment AI. And with that, you can go in and ask questions around what the report contains, and it will help to navigate you to fact-based source reference data and information from the report. So for those who look at Europe's environment and want to really dive in but don't know where to start, that's actually a great way of using this AI-powered assistant to go into the knowledge we have. And we're also looking to integrate AI more and more in our work across the entire agency, from data analysis, machine learning. Again, air quality is a great example of where we can use that. And we want to use it more and more in the future to actually supercharge some of our knowledge services and making it more accessible and adaptive to the audiences who need to access it.
And maybe to complement what I think will be important going forward, that whatever we do, is not jeopardizing our own identity and the trust that we have as an institution, meaning that the information comes from the countries and is authoritative. So, but on the other hand, if we get that right, I think there's huge potential also in, as Karl said, in improving the analytics, but also gap filling, as we say, because you cannot have monitoring everywhere, and it's also cost intensive for the countries. So, of course, you can fill the gaps with artificial intelligence or machine learning. I'm not an expert there, but this is one area. Or the other really huge area that I would see is also in future scenarios and how the state of the environment will evolve, and if you put in different scenarios, that is something we can do a lot more with AI in the future.
And perhaps that's not replaceable by robots or AI. It's the people-to-people contacts of the networks.
Yes.
Perhaps it'd be interesting for the listener and the viewer to know how intensive this nurturing of this network is, how important that is for the EA, for the agency, as far as, people-to-people contacts in the network.
Yeah. I think it's our DNA. It's who we are as an organization, and I would argue that also this time with the Europe's Environment Report, it's the first time that we see there's full ownership of all the member countries of that full assessment, because it means they own their own part, but they also own the whole report, and they can see how they are doing compared to others. They can see what needs to happen in my country and what are the maybe best practices that others have already done. So I think it's a value for the continent, but also for us as an institution. I see this dimension of, we are a European institution, of course. We look at the full Europe as a continent, but we also maybe sometimes lack the information coming upwards, because many of the best ideas that we currently have and how we overcome our challenges and towards a sustainable Europe is coming very much from cities, from local communities. That comes from the ground, and we are one organization that can bring that up to the EU level and then bring it also into the EU thinking.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Perhaps the last question in this segment, what are your hopes for how the Europe's Environment 2025 report will be used by those who read it? Karl, you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are lots of different people who will look at the report, and they'll all have different questions and different needs, from policymakers to citizens. So my hope for those who are accessing the report is that you take a look at it, you explore it, see what it's actually telling us about our environment, our climate, and see how Europe's progressing. Because Katja mentioned previously about local communities, regions, cities. It's actually all of us collectively at every level who really need to understand the challenges we face, but also the progress we're making and the opportunities and where we can take action. So my hope is that people will go in and read it and access it and take insights from it. And that's why we've really tried to take this approach where we've given an easier entry through AI assistance, but you also have the report, you have the country spaces, you've got the indicators, you have the profiles. So really trying to cater for different audiences so that they can actually access it and derive insights from it.
Yeah, I would also argue, I would hope that people who read it, they take it as what it is, namely it's a snapshot of where we are today as Europe in our journey to a sustainable future. And I think the picture is, of course, mixed, so you can have some really good examples, what works really well, and there's other areas where it's still a bit behind, we can say. But then you have a lot of wealth of information of best practices, what are different countries doing? Where is, let's say, Finland good in the energy transition? Where is Slovenia good? Oh, maybe they have a really good biodiversity. They can protect that better than others. So you can learn from each other, from other countries, and you can also see where it's a reality check where we are and what still needs to be done.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
This is part of the show where we explore with our guests what drives them, what passions they have to work in the field that we work in, climate, environment, sustainability. Katja, can I ask you this first? Why are you working in this area?
Because I really want us to change and want us to make progress as a European continent. And I can say that I started working in this field very early in the 90s after the German reunification, where we had a very different picture between East and West Germany. And I think that's also the same in Europe. We have different speeds and different starting points, but the goal is the same. And I am very intrigued by this fact that we can actually move towards somewhere. even though we are very different, So I think that drives me. Thank you.
Karl, what about yourself?
Yeah, what drives me? First of all, when I joined the agency, I looked at the mission of the agency and what it's here to achieve. And it's something that affects every single one of us. It doesn't matter who you are. The issues we work on, environment, climate, sustainability, they affect every single one of us in our day-to-day lives, from the air we breathe, the water we swim in and drink, to the food that we consume, everything effectively. So the work really matters. And what motivates me is, and of course I come from a digital background, digitalization, technology. I'm not a climate scientist, but I think when you bring those domains together, there's an opportunity to actually inform concrete action. And that motivates me enormously, because however political it can sometimes feel with this area, data speaks. And data speaks volumes, and knowledge speaks volumes. And I feel like the work of the agency and the network that we're part of is so critically important, because we need to keep moving the conversation forward, informing on progress, informing on actions. And if I look at where I'm from, the issues that I saw as a kid and growing up, environmental issues, I now understand in a totally different way than I did then. And also, importantly, what actions can be taken to actually address, biodiversity collapse or pollution issues, but also seeing the impact of positive action. We're here in Copenhagen, the bathing water is now super clean and people swim in it every day, whereas I understand 20 years ago they couldn't. So you actually see the impact of this work. So this was
Perhaps to both of you, as a child, was there an impression made of the environment or climate? It's something you can remember from your childhood that said, oh, this is something interesting, or like catching bugs or
I mean, yes, but that was when I was already young, as an adult. So in my childhood, I think I just took it all for granted how it was. And it was beautiful to go to lakes and to swim, but I didn't see the challenges. But then later, of course, after the reunification, it was a huge difference. And only then we became aware of all the pollution that came from these coal mines, from the chemical industry in East Germany, and how severe these impacts have been actually on people, but also on the environment. And now how much it actually took to rebuild many of these areas there in East Germany. So I think that was a big impact that I had from that.
Certainly an eye-opener for
Definitely an eye-opener.
Yeah. Karl, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I think about it growing up, I think I was always at this background awareness of global warming. That was always the thing. But actually, the area I'm from in Ireland, and I've come to appreciate it more now. I don't live there, I think, but it's one of the most beautiful places, I think, on Earth. Maybe I'm a bit biased. But whenever I now understand the impact of pollution on degradation of water quality, etc., and the importance of actually taking positive action to preserve that environment, I think that's something that I've become more aware of as I get older. Now realizing the impact we can make when we actually protect water systems, urban wastewater treatment, etc., so that we don't discharge pollution into the sea. So really just seeing that kind of greater respect and awareness for our environment, and protecting areas like the part of Europe that I'm from.
Great. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you for listening and watching to today's show, and thank you to our two guests for joining us. For more information on Europe's Environment 2025 report, you can see the report on our website at eea.europa.eu. Join us next time when we're going to discuss sustainability and the transitions with two other experts here at the EEA. Bye for now.